Howdy. This video is part of the Director Project, a monthly playlist where video essayists from across YouTube submit for the approval of the Film Society an analysis of the work of a chosen director. December's focus was Miyazaki, and this is a certified late entrant. If you enjoy my video and want to see what everyone else has done, check out the playlist and stay tuned for more. If you have your own video, just @Culpopture on Twitter or slide into those DMs. With that out of the way, start your engines. Hayao Miyazaki. When I say his name, what springs to mind? If you haven't heard of him, I'm not sure what you're doing here, but he's the guy who directed Spirited Away. Everybody knows Spirited Away. For the Ghibli veterans, you probably all jump to the same things. Nature, environmentalism, pacifism, flight. Heroines, tradition, fantasy, technology, love, loss, beauty. Miyazaki is an undisputed auteur, one of, if not the greatest animators alive today. As an auteur, he has his calling cards and an unmistakable vibe. Most of his films take place in a Japan brimming with magical realism, or nondescript fantasy worlds incorporating European and Japanese aesthetics. He doesn't always conform to this standard, most notably in his latest film, The Wind Rises. It follows a historical figure at a defined time and place in our real world. But most of the original stories he developed toe the line. In Nausicaa, we visit an entirely fictional land destroyed by a vicious war. In Laputa and Kiki, small European towns. And in Totoro, the Japanese countryside populated with forest spirits. 1992's Porco Rosso was the first to break the mold. Porco concerns the antics of down-and-out fighter pilots in the interwar years driven to piracy in order to turn a profit during the Great Depression. The Crimson Pig earns his keep by thwarting them and rescuing their hostages. Set on the Adriatic Sea between the then kingdoms of Yugoslavia and Italy, Porco Rosso occurs in a specific time and place, with defined nationalities for its characters. Porco, Gina, and Fio are all Italians, and the supporting cast of ragtag seaplane pirates are deserters from all over Europe. Except for one, Donald Curtis, who has the honor of being the only American character in Miyazaki's filmography. Which is of note, because Miyazaki hates America.
Fuck America.
Right off the bat, I have to say Breadsword has a great video on how Howl's Moving Castle is actually about the Iraq War, how Madame Solomon is Dick Cheney and the bumbling king is George W. Bush, and how the film is a repudiation of American imperialism that had reached a grim zenith in 2004. You want to check that out if you haven't, no doubt. Many of Miyazaki's films have an apparently political edge to them. He studied political science in college and has made no secret of his ardent pacifism. Miyazaki grew up in the midst of World War II and witnessed the horrors of war firsthand. He is wholly against violence and the asinine reasons men inflicted upon one another. America, this is America, is not. Porco Rosso debuted a decade before America invaded Iraq, and Miyazaki plainly refused to come to LA to accept the Academy Award for Spirited Away because he didn't want to visit a country that was bombing Iraq. It offers a window into the mind of this man, this great filmmaker, this auteur, before he vowed to never make a film that would be well received in the United States again. In 1983, Miyazaki released a book called Hayao Miyazaki Image Board that contained his doodles and musings from over the years. Among them was this image of a grumpy young Miyazaki saying he's anti-jeans, anti-bourbon, anti-burgers. I guess that's why Ronald has never gotten a sponsorship in a Ghibli flick. He's anti-fried chicken, anti-cola, anti-American coffee, anti-New York, anti-West Coast, Disneyland, go back to America. In addition to turning both Tupac and Biggie against him, Miyazaki discusses his aversion to driving. He never tried to learn until he felt compelled to drive his young son to daycare, and even then, he attended lessons begrudgingly. You see, Miyazaki identified cars as part of the Americanization of Japan, which he was, and is, strongly opposed to. There's no point in this man's history where you'll catch him tattooing the grand old rag on his chest. When production on Porco Rosso was getting off the ground, the Gulf War had just ended. In 1990, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded the small neighboring nation of Kuwait, quickly overrunning its small military and annexing the country as well as its lucrative oil fields. The unprompted attack earned international condemnation, and then-President George H.W. Bush initiated a massive diplomatic effort to assemble a united force that went on to liberate Kuwait. It was the largest military coalition since World War II. The war was quick and decisive, and the mission to oust Iraq from Kuwait was an honorable one. But on the last night of hostilities, American, French, British, and Canadian forces turned Highway 80 between Kuwait City and Basra in Iraq into the infamous Highway of Death. Retreating Iraqi soldiers were bombarded by air and ground forces, leaving a mile of destroyed or abandoned vehicles and over 1,000 dead within and without. Point blank, former Attorney General under LBJ, Ramsey Clark, called it a violation of the Geneva Conventions, which outlaw killing soldiers out of combat. Fun fact, 2019's Call of Duty Modern Warfare depicted a highway of death in the fictional Middle Eastern country of Urzikstan. In the game, the attack is carried out by Russians. Shortly before the release of Porco, Miyazaki called his homeland a nation that merely dithers around. I had thought that, thanks to us having lost the war, we Japanese might have finally become a little more skeptical about national claims of righteousness and just causes. Watching Bush, I can only think he is possessed by the ghost of John Wayne, telling him that this is the way a real man should act. Saddam Hussein's sense of righteousness is the same. In February 1991, in the midst of the war, Japanese Major General Nozomu Yoshitomi recalls meeting with his American counterparts in Tokyo to play war games. But the Americans were distracted, closely observing coverage of the war on CNN. Meanwhile, on the local news, Japanese soldiers were building snowmen as part of a winter festival. An American general turned to him and asked, "How can Japan be a true US ally if they don't send troops?" Yoshitomi recalls it as a pivotal humiliation. Political scientists point to the Gulf War as a major turning point for Japan. In the wake of World War II and the countless horrors inflicted by the Empire of Japan upon its neighbors, the new American-enforced Constitution, adopted in 1947, included a pacifistic provision. Article 9 revokes Japan's right to make war or use war as a means of settling international disputes. Japanese troops would not engage in combat except in explicit self-defense. The embarrassment of sitting on the sidelines while American troops fought in Kuwait, however, began the steady easing of these restrictions. When America invaded Iraq under false pretenses in 2003, Japanese troops were on the ground, largely in a humanitarian capacity, but regardless, observers and protesters against the unpopular war within Japan thought it was difficult to see how the deployment complied with Article 9. But I've gotten ahead of myself. Let's talk about Curtis. Curtis first appears in Miyazaki's one-shot watercolor manga The Age of the Flying Boat, which Porco was developed from. Curtis is introduced as American villain Donald Chuck. He demands a bigger panel for himself in his introduction and flies for the sake of villains throughout the world. In his illicitly constructed Curtis RC-30, Chuck engages in petty piracy against the Italian Air Force and shoots Porco down for glory. For the subsequent month that Porco is out of commission following the dogfight, Chuck rises to become unelected ringleader of the pirates, but agrees to put it all on the line when he meets Fio, asking for her hand in marriage. Of course, Porco, the easygoing, chivalrous European hero, is victorious, and it all ends happily. There's nothing as beautiful as the lines of a wooden monocoque body polished to perfection by Italian craftsmen, he says of his prized plane. To hell with American rationalism. Donald Chuck is portrayed unflatteringly, to be sure. He's an entirely one-dimensional opportunist who comes to a shattered Europe to steal a nest egg and snag an Italian bride to bring home to his mama back in Arizona. In the film, he's renamed Donald Curtis, like his plane, and comes instead from Texas. An otherwise unimportant distinction that at least gave Cary Elwes a reason to rock that southern drawl.
I might just take it back to Texas as a gift from Ma.
Curtis's motivations are the same. At his core, he's an opportunist. The Adriatic is a lawless Wild West, and Curtis is a cowboy looking to become a legend.
Make way for the American! Yee-haw!
Beyond the limited panels of a comic, he gets more time to shine. Donald, Curtis, is perhaps Miyazaki's most presciently named character. He's boastful, and brash, overconfident, and flashy. Curtis falls in love with every woman he meets, and genuinely believes that he will be a movie star and one day...
the president!
Really presciently named. Contemporarily, it's easy to see a comparison to Ronald Reagan. our first star turned leader of the free world who is, even today, more famous for his charisma than his policy. And here's the deal. Behind the swelling romance and breathtaking flight, Porco Rosso is a deeply political film. I know. Shocker. Plenty has been said on the political overtones of the film. Porco serves in the Italian army in World War I, but becomes disillusioned with war after witnessing the slaughter of his friends, and disillusioned with his country as Italy descends into fascism under Benito Mussolini. Porco Rosso has a lot to say about the nature of masculinity, the immorality of war, and the agency of women who were vital to the functioning of Western societies when all the men were dead or gone away to find work. I think a major overarching theme in Porco Rosso is pride, national pride, pride in oneself and one's actions. The Italian secret police hunt Porco because his gallivanting around the Adriatic reflects poorly on the motherland. Why has the Crimson Pig abandoned the great nation of Italy? No doubt his prowess in the air would be greatly valuable, and his refusal to enlist stains their image. In grand terms, the gallant Porco, consumed by survivor's guilt and convinced that he is a pig, lacks any personal pride. The American villain, Curtis, is overflowing with it. It's one attribute that succinctly captures their vast differences. It's why Gina still loves Porco and could never love a man like Curtis.
Love is a little bit more complicated here than it is in America. Falling in love happens to you all the time. So have fun in Hollywood, little boy.
Little boy?
The resolution of the film and the lifting of Porco's curse are all to do with his pride. Porco regains some self-love, realizes he's been selfish, and allows himself to love again. Or at least, I think that's how it ends. Theo is pretty coy about it. Porco Rosso is reminiscent of those wartime dramas, the Casablancas for sure. It's got the romance and the style and the chivalry. Curtis is good-looking and skillful. He courts Gina in a grand, romantic fashion. In manner, Curtis could be the hero of his own film, to be sure. I mean, in-universe, he literally becomes a movie star in some studio mess. Porco Rosso has an American villain because it's one of the most realistic of Miyazaki's films. It's a multinational film. You see it in the beginning with that wonderful text crawl with multiple languages. I personally stan that little Arabic mouse going right to left. Yes, the text is there because Porco was made to play on JAL flights for tired middle-aged businessmen, and they wanted them all to get what was going down from the get-go, but there are no accidents. There are no incidents. This is a perfect opener from an artistic standpoint. You see, Porco Rosso is about the real world, and so it has to contend with the reality of our political and social sphere. In the 1990s when the film was made, the 1920s when it's set, and the roaring 2020s that we find ourselves in today, that means that wherever you are on this great blue marble, you're gonna have to contend with America. In 90s Japan, Americans were influencing Japan's vow to avoid the use of force. During the first half of the 20th century, America became more and more involved in European affairs, rode in its finest hour, and made great strides in expanding its influence over European states, rising from the ashes of a broken Europe to become a dominant world power opposite the Soviet Union. The point is, we get everywhere. Curtis is a meddler. Like dastardly American cars driving through Japan, he intrudes upon the Europe in Porco Rosso. It's a fictionalized Europe, one that's tamed, rendered as a charming sight of pleasurable consumption, made distant and viewed through a tourist gaze. I mean, they serve wine and cheese at a dogfight, but Miyazaki said that all the characters in the film have a seasoned realism about them. Porco Rosso is not a gritty scrutinization of America's place in the world, but Curtis is an invasive species. He's entirely glitz and glamour. He's a buffoon looking for a soaring climax at any minute. To the other characters in the film, he's exhausting. Theo shames the European pirates for hiding behind an American. They take the easy way, coasting in the vapor trails of the Schneider Cup winner. They sell themselves out to the biggest fish in the pond, and her appeal gets through to them. You know, in the climactic fight at the end of the film, that the pirates secretly want the pig to win. When Porco stands up to Curtis, he stands up for all of them as well, to his touristic trophies and his Hollywood charades and his invasion of their world. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving America as the sole superpower in the world. And when there's only one king, you're either with him or against him. For an American who who consumes mostly American films, Donald Curtis is a curio. Here in this country, we like to butcher foreign films and fit them into a more digestible mold. We reduced Godzilla from a solemn representation of the horrors of nuclear power gone awry to a kitschy kaiju, neutering it of its cultural context. Miyazaki's producer famously sent Harvey, hopefully eating shit in prison, Weinstein, a katana while Miramax was preparing Mononoke for an American release. The card attached read, "No cuts." We've only recently stopped doing it, and even then a brilliant film comes out that requires us to read subtitles and we bitch and moan about it. All that is to say that it's easy for an American audience to see Curtis as just a bumbling pretty boy, to fail to read into the context that Miyazaki provides in the greater catalog of his work, his thoughts, his worldview. Miyazaki writes in Image Board that, "I dislike the United States that dropped the nuclear bombs and does not regret it. I'm anti-Security Council, I'm against Neutral Alliance, and against Americanization. America has been at war for 226 of the 244 years that it has existed." Miyazaki feared that Japan, being a good ally, would be dragged in. In 2014, the Japanese government essentially completed its walk back of Article 9. Then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had promised that Japan will never take part in fighting such as has taken place in the Gulf War or the Iraq War. But the reinterpretation of Article 9 under his government allows the Japan Self-Defense Forces to engage in combat abroad in order to defend its allies, even if Japan is not under attack, if there is a clear threat. If that's all it takes, Uncle Sam's got a highway to sell you. As the unmatched superpower in the world right now, America has deep-rooted faults that create a knock-on effect. America spends more on its military than the next 10 countries after it combined, most of which are its allies, while social programs at home lag behind most comparable liberal democracies. America has funded pointless violence and endless wars, engaged in war crimes it refuses to be tried for, and pardons of its own accord. America enables autocracy and apartheid, and occupation and censorship and avarice, if the men engaging in it say the right things and pay the right coin. Its ultra-wealthy upper class enriches itself off of an obscene military-industrial complex and abuses at home and abroad at the expense of men, women, and children. Miyazaki has a point, a great one. Depending on where you live, and more importantly, how you live, American hegemony is either a blessing or a curse. But this video is about Donald Curtis. He is the American villain, but he's also a character that lives in Miyazaki's world. Speaking in a memo to the staff working on Porco Rosso, Miyazaki says, "We must treat every character respectfully. We must love their foolishness." I like Curtis. I think everybody who watches the film does. We love his foolishness. The film is Porco's story, and Curtis doesn't fit into his world. But for a villain, he turns out alright. He achieves his dream, half of it at least. In the end, he keeps his word, and he's honorable in his own way. He helps Porco lead the Air Force away from the others after being humiliated. He dusts himself off and gets back to it. I think you must know by now that Miyazaki is not a fan of America.
Fuck America.
But speaking about his greatest love, a flight, he offers uncharacteristically kind words. In little shops across America, some planes were made by engineers drawing up blueprints on their own, working on a hunch with a collection of ladies from the neighborhood doing the assembly. It was a time when a person's intuition, sense, experience, or even passion could have an overall effect on a plane's performance. What Miyazaki has identified, I'd say, is that classic American spirit. No, this isn't a big reveal that Miyazaki secretly has a soft spot for the land of the free because we've got gumption. But it is the reason why Curtis is such an important character in Porco Rosso and his filmography. The thesis of Miyazaki's work, if I could be so bold as to identify one, is that there are greater things in us that we must face together, and grander things within us to hold fast to. As the world around us feels at times like it's crumbling, Miyazaki insists that you may not like what's happening, but just accept it, and let's try to live together. Even if you feel angry, let's be patient and endure. Let's try to live together. I've realized that this is the only way forward. With Porco Rosso, I feel as though I gained the means to do so. Despite Porco's setting in a depression, and between the two greatest wars in world history, it's easy viewing. In the end, no one gets hurt. Porco Rosso is a hopeful film. All of Miyazaki's films are. Hopeful that we can make it in spite of ourselves, our pride, and our history. Curtis delivers the most powerful line in the film, for Porco's sake, the one that changes him back from a pig into a man. Curtis quite literally beats some sense into our swinish hero. Porco realizes for the first time how loved he is and how selfish he's been. Yes, you, American fan watching this video. Your favorite anime man hates America. His films are anathema to the worst of this country, the violence and the hubris. But Hayao Miyazaki gave us Curtis. And Curtis saves the day. Thanks so much for watching this video. This is a lot more involved than my last one, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe for more video essays and occasional memes. Take care.